Alright, in this video, we're going to be creating the lobby view. So for the most part, I'm going to be copying a lot of those elements from our previously created game. So I'll pause the video for a second and I'll come back showing you everything that we've done so far. Alright, so I basically went back to our previous game and I copied everything from there. The only changes that I've done so far is having changed every class to class name, having changed no validate, it was all lowercase like that, so I changed that to no validate. And then as far as the images, I imported the images themselves directly as regular imports at the top of my file, and then I referenced them in the image sources here. And that is pretty much what I've done so far. Now looking at this view, it looks pretty much similar to what we had earlier, except that we have kind of better looks for our buttons here. And then just the fact that it's centered, and that is because if we look at our app.css here, we'll find that we have text aligned everything to the center. So now looking at this, I kind of don't like how our buttons are kind of hidden. You can actually tell that this is a button. We call this a ghost button because it doesn't have a true border. So let me go ahead and find where we have our CSS for our buttons here. Oh, right there. So for the border, I'm going to change that transparent to use one of our CSS variables here, color border. And if I save that, let's see if that actually picks up here. Oh, here we go. So now at least we can see that there is a boundary for where the button is. Now let's see what else can we do to improve our file a little bit. Now when you look at your field set of all the avatar options, we see that we have this label with the input, the image, and the span repeated multiple times in this section here. So what we could do here is that we can wrap it in a loop and basically render it once. So to do that, I'll go ahead and up on the top here, inside of my component, I'm gonna create a new variable. I'll call this avatars. And here we're gonna have a key, which would be the name of the character. So let's say wizard. And the path or the image for it would be whatever the wizard avatar is. And here we go. Now this is one object, so we actually need to have an array of objects. So we'll create multiples of these. And just to save me some time, let me copy them all at once. And let's see how I can be a little bit clever with those. And here we go. We have our kind of dictionary of all the avatars that we have. Now this variable is not being used, so let me go find where I have my avatars here, and let's create a loop. So for each avatar, we're gonna use the map function to iterate over them, and for each one we'll do the following: return basically this bit right here. Except that now for the image, we want this to be avatar dot image, and for the value, the alternate, and the span, we want these to be avatar dot key. And as we mentioned last week, because we're using the map function, we're going to have to give each of those items a key. That way our virtual DOM is able to detect which item is which. Now, if I save this, we see them duplicated twice. That's because we have it once using the loop and another that was hard-coded. So if I go ahead and remove that, we are all set. So we get cleaner and shorter code without having to worry about maybe potentially missing one of those properties in one of the avatars that we have. One thing to consider as well, right now we have our avatars defined inside of our component, which means every time the state changes or the state of that component changes, React is going to try to re-render that component, and basically that will also mean it will try to recreate this variable again. But maybe we can avoid that overhead by moving it outside of the component so it becomes a true constant, something that is not affected by any changes to the state of our component here. Now if I save that, Here we go. Everything should still work as expected. One other thing I noticed, here we have the keys are all lowercase, which means our span here is now showing the names in a lowercase. And we could try to use the to uppercase function, but that would also mean it's gonna change the entire string to be all uppercase. So let's go ahead and maybe create a utility function up over here. I'll create a function. I'll call this capitalize. And what this will do is basically we'll receive a string and it's gonna return, or maybe before it even returns anything, we'll check. If we don't receive anything, we'll just return an empty string. Otherwise, if we do get a string, what we will do here is that we will take the first character, or the character at index 0, and we'll call the to uppercase function on that. And then we're gonna append it to the leftover of whatever that string is. So the string dot slice, and if you don't know how the slice function works, it basically takes a start index, and in that case that will be index 1 because we're skipping number 0, and we don't need to provide the end index because we just want the rest of the string. And to be safe, we'll just make sure that this is converted to lowercase. All right, let's see how this function is gonna be used. If I take this capitalize and I'll go over to my span, instead of calling to uppercase, we'll call our capitalize function by passing in the avatar. If I save, here we go. Only the first character is being converted to uppercase and then the rest is lowercase. Now, because this seems like a very useful function that we're going to be using over and over, for organizational sake, let me go ahead and create a new folder here. I'll call this utilities, or utils for short. And in here, I'm going to have another file. Let's just call it string formatting.js. And I'll copy that function over to there. Stick it, cut, save it there, and we'll make sure that we're exporting the function just so we can go back over here and import it. So import capitalize from this file, and everything should still work as normal right now. Great. Now let's start building the actual form. Right now, all of this is just inputs that do nothing. So let's start capturing those into state values. So here I'll create my name or player name with a set name, and this will come from use state, and the value for this is going to be, maybe the default is going to be an empty string. And let me make sure that I go into the input, and over here we'll set the value to be whatever the name is. Now we can save it. If I start typing something here, nothing is actually showing up, and if I open my inspector, you'll see an error that basically says that you have a component that is being changed from an uncontrolled input, meaning that you still don't have that control over the input, because even though you are setting the value for it, you're not capturing when that value changes. So over here, let's capture that event, and we'll basically say whenever that value changes or whenever this input changes, we want you to call set name with the e target value. We save, and if I start, let's clear our console here. If I refresh, we're still seeing some errors here. Okay, on line 36, so it looks like I missed a few of regular HTML to React HTML conversions. So this here is supposed to be called HTML4, not just 4. And also on line 68, I have this thing called selected. In our case, that will look a little bit different. We're actually going to set it at the select level, but we'll come back to that in a second. So let me just save this, clear the console, refresh. Okay, did I miss another one? Line 65, another 4. So this is HTML4. And Where is that coming from now? All right, it all is gone. If I refresh, no errors coming now. Now, if I go over to my player name and I start typing, everything is being captured as I would expect it to. So now we created a state in which we are capturing the value of the input. And whenever that value changes, whenever the user types something, we're able to capture that into our state right here. Now let's go over here and look for where do we have our greeting right there. Let's actually change it so that it checks for if there is a name, then I want you to say hello and then whatever that name is. Otherwise, we just returning null. If I save, and let's see what happens now. If I refresh, if I type in something, that name starts appearing next to hello. So if I type in my name, it automatically updates my UI. It just uses a state as a single source of truth for how my UI should look like. Let's capture the rest of the items here on our form. So let me go ahead and look for my next section. Okay. And I'll go ahead and create another state for my avatar. Set avatar. And also by default, we're just not going to capture anything. Let's have another one for the difficulty. And this is where I was going to talk about how we're no longer going to be using the selected attribute of the HTML option, but instead we're going to use the state for that. So maybe our default is going to be normal. And let's save that. We'll have another one for the dark mode, and we'll have the default to be light mode. Okay. Let's start with the difficulty because it might be easier to actually get that out of the way. I'll go into the difficulty section. For the value, I'm actually going to add a value property, which will contain the difficulty value from the state. Let's put this over multiple lines just so it's a little bit easier to see. And also, because we want this to be a controlled input, we're going to add an on change. Whenever the input here changes, we want you to call set difficulty with the value of e target dot value. All right, so let's see if that actually works. If I save this, let's see, there are some errors somewhere here. Oh, just being unused. We'll fix that in a second. If I change this to hard, if it changes, that's already an indicator that our state is being updated because the value of the select is actually driven by the state. So if the value has changed, as you can see it in the UI, that means that this is actually working. But just so you're extra safe, let's go ahead and add a value here for difficulty. So we're just gonna display what the difficulty is whenever it changes values. So right now it is hard, but if I change that to normal, I'll say normal, go easy, and it is easy as well. Great, everything is being captured in our state. Let's do the same thing for our dark mode, again, because it's one of the easier ones. And for this toggle right here, we're basically gonna have a checked property, and this is gonna be driven by whether the dark mode is on or not. But now as I'm thinking about it, let's just make this a Boolean value. So if I save this, or let me go up to the state, let's change that so it is false by default. And let's take this function. We're gonna go back to our checkbox and we're gonna say on change. I think on change also works here. We're gonna capture that event and we'll call set dark mode to whatever the value of the target value is. Let's save this. Let's go over here. Instead of difficulty, let's just add a dark mode value here so that we can see whether it's being set to true or false. Right now it shows nothing. All right, let's use an expression instead. So find out whatever the dark mode is right now and store whatever the opposite of this. And in that case, we don't need to capture the event because we're going to be driving that based off of the state itself. Let's save. This is refresh. This is off, on, off, on, so on and so forth. Looks great so far, but let's find out why this is not displaying our value here. Maybe it's not able to render Boolean value here. So let me convert it to a string. All right, here we go. So now it's true, now it's false, so on and so forth. If I switch the default to false and refresh, it should be unchecked by default. All right, so the last thing that we need to capture right now are the value of the avatars. And if we look here, we see that our avatars are basically radio buttons that we've changed their styles a little bit. So what we need to do now is capture when should they be checked and how do we capture what the value or what the new value is. So I'll come over here and I'll add another property called checked. And we want this to be checked only if the current avatar.key equals whatever the avatar state is. Now this is gonna conflict because now React is not gonna know which avatar are you referring to. Are you referring to the one defined up on the top in the state or the one defined in this local scope here? So what we should do is rename this to something else. So I'll just call it A for short. And in that case, we gotta make sure that our A.key equals whatever the avatar state value is. Yep, now it is being used. Okay, so if I save, we get this error saying you're setting what the checked property is, but you're not capturing what happens when that changes. So what we need to do when this changes is basically call set avatar by passing in whatever the value of A.key is. So if I save that now and refresh, we don't get this error anymore. I'm able to switch between all of my avatar selections and they should be now captured in our state. How would I know? Let's go back to this section here. I'll remove the dark mode stuff and replace it with the selected avatar is and avatar. If I save it, now it says night. As I change, the state value is also changing and it's updating our UI. Great. Now let me just clean up everything and let's recap what we did so far. Our lobby is pretty much just a form that captures the player name, what avatar they want to select, what's the difficulty level they are selecting, and whether they want the dark mode to be toggled on or off. We're changing all of those inputs here into controlled inputs, meaning that we're able to control them through our React by modifying what their value is and by listening in to the event of when this value changes, we take that value and we update our state with. The only big difference really is what we've done with the avatar section. We wrapped it in a for loop because this section here, we just didn't need to repeat it over and over again when we could wrap it in a loop. Now, as we're capturing all those values, when I hit save, obviously nothing is happening, or maybe something is happening. The page re-rendered here, but we're gonna fix that by handling the form submission properly and sending these values back to our app component. That way we can use them for our game component as well.